I ain't never asked y'all for anything, but I need your help with this. There's almost 7 million people that follow me. Somebody's got to know something.
TikTok star Ophelia Nichols begs for answers after her son Randon Lee was fatally shot in Alabama just one day before his birthday.
Today would have been my baby child's 19th birthday. But he was took from me last night. My son was murdered. He was shot. And I have this hatred in my heart that I don't recognize. Because I've never felt hate for anybody.
According to investigators, Reuben Gully drove to an Exxon gas station on St. Stephen's Road in Prichard, Alabama, got into Randon Lee's car, and shot him during what was supposed to be a marijuana deal. That's what 20-year-old Reuben Thomas Gully allegedly did to 18-year-old Randon Lee on June 24th, 2022, just one day before Randon's 19th birthday. Randon Lee was 18 years old. He was the youngest of 4 children. He had a girlfriend who cared about him, a mother who loved him, and an entire online community that watched him grow up. He was the son of Ophelia Nichols, known to millions as Mama Tot on TikTok, where she spread messages of encouragement and called her followers her kids. Randon had his whole life ahead of him. The same young man who was about to celebrate his 19th birthday. The same young man whose mother had millions of people who cared about his family. The same young man who made a choice to sell marijuana that would cost him everything. Reuben Gully was 20 years old. According to court records, he had been one of Randon's marijuana customers. He didn't have what Randon had: a supportive family, a social media presence, a mother fighting for him. What he allegedly did have was a plan to meet Randon at a gas station on a Friday night in June. So the question everyone's asking is this: what really happened in that car at the Exxon station? Was this a robbery gone wrong, a drug deal dispute, or something else entirely? And how can justice be served when the lead investigator on the case has been convicted of perjury? This is the story of how an 18-year-old side hustle became a fatal decision, and how a gas station parking lot became the scene of a tragedy that would shake a community and complicate a murder trial 3 years later. Before we get too deep, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you find value in these discussions. Randon Lee was 18 years old. He lived in Alabama, the youngest of 4 children born to Ophelia Nichols and her family. But to understand who Randon was, you have to understand the world he grew up in. His mother wasn't just a mom. She was Mama Tot, a TikTok star with millions of followers who came to her videos for encouragement, comfort, and a kind of unconditional love that felt like home. Ophelia built an empire on authenticity, calling her followers her kids, checking in on them, reminding them they were loved. She was the internet's mom, and Randon was her real son. Being the child of an internet celebrity comes with complications. Your life is public. Your struggles are visible. Your family's joy and pain play out in front of millions. But according to those who knew him, Randon handled it. He was figuring out who he was, navigating young adulthood the way so many 18-year-olds do, with hopes, mistakes, plans, and a belief that he had time to figure it all out. Randon had a girlfriend who cared about him. According to court testimony, she knew about his marijuana sales. She knew he'd sold to certain people before. She knew when he was setting up deals. This wasn't a secret life hidden from everyone. It was a decision he'd made, a risk he was taking, a hustle that he thought he could manage. He was close with his siblings. He was part of a family that, despite whatever challenges they faced, stuck together. When Ophelia posted about her children, there was pride there. When she talked about her family, there was love. Randon wasn't perfect. None of us are at 18, but he was hers, and she was his, and that bond was real. On social media, you could see glimpses of who Randon was becoming. A young man trying to find his path. Someone who existed both in the spotlight of his mother's fame and in his own private world. Someone who made choices that seemed manageable to him, but carried risks he may not have fully understood. He was days away from his 19th birthday. 19. Think about what that means. Most people at 19 are still figuring out basic life skills. They're making mistakes and learning from them. They're testing boundaries and discovering consequences. They're not supposed to be planning their funerals. Randon had plans. He had a birthday coming up. He had a girlfriend, a family, a future that seemed to stretch out ahead of him with all the messy possibility that comes with being young. He wasn't a child anymore, but he wasn't fully an adult either. He was in that in-between space where you think you're invincible, where you think you can handle situations that are actually beyond your control. According to those who knew him, Randon could be friendly. He could be social. He was navigating life in a small Alabama community, trying to carve out his own identity separate from being Mama Tot's son.
Children live out on their own, and, pay their own bills, and they have a good job, and, just don't cross your mind that they would be doing anything to get themselves into trouble.
That's hard to do when millions of people know who your mother is. That pressure to be someone, to make your own way, to prove yourself, it's real. Was selling marijuana the right choice? No. Was it legal? No. Was it a decision that reflected poor judgment? Absolutely. But it was the choice of an 18-year-old who thought he had it under control, who thought he knew his customers, who thought meeting someone at a gas station to make a sale was just another transaction. He thought wrong. What Randon couldn't have known, what none of us can know when we're 18 and making choices that seem manageable, is which decision will be the one that ends everything. He couldn't have known that getting into a car with someone he'd sold to before would be the last decision he'd ever make. He couldn't have known that 2 minutes after a phone call, his life would be over. Randon Lee was 18 years old. He was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's boyfriend. He was a young man with flaws and potential, mistakes and possibilities. He was real. He existed. He mattered. That was Randon Lee. Reuben Thomas Gully was 20 years old at the time of Randon Lee's death. He was from Saraland, Alabama, a small city just outside Mobile. But to understand what happened on June 24th, 2022, you need to understand what kind of person investigators believe pulled the trigger. According to testimony presented during the preliminary hearing, Randon's girlfriend told investigators that Gully had been a customer before. This wasn't their first transaction. Randon had sold marijuana to Gully previously, and on June 24th, 2022, another deal was arranged. Detective Jason Hadaway of the Prichard Police Department testified about the investigation. He stated that phone records showed Gully called Randon just 2 minutes before the shooting occurred. 2 minutes. That's how much time passed between a phone call and a young man bleeding out in a car. But here's what makes this case particularly challenging. The evidence wasn't overwhelming. During the preliminary hearing, Detective Hadaway had to acknowledge significant gaps in the investigation. Police had not talked to any witnesses who could identify Gully as the actual shooter. They did not recover shell casings from Lee's car. They did not find a murder weapon. They had no fingerprints linking Gully to the scene. They had no DNA evidence. What they did have were phone records showing calls between Gully and Lee. They had testimony from Lee's girlfriend about the nature of their relationship as dealer and customer. They had surveillance footage from the gas station showing vehicles arriving and suspects getting out of one vehicle and entering Lee's car. But they didn't have the kind of physical evidence that makes a case bulletproof. Gully's defense attorney would later point to these gaps, arguing that phone calls alone shouldn't be enough to convict someone of murder. The prosecution would argue that the totality of circumstances, the history of transactions, the phone call timing, the surveillance footage, the witness testimony, painted a clear picture of what happened. In August 2022, approximately 2 months after Randon's death, Gully surrendered to police. He was charged with murder. At his initial appearance, he was held without bond. He pleaded not guilty. For nearly 3 years, this case has wound through the court system. Gully has remained in custody. And as of October 2025, he made a decision that shocked even his own attorney. He rejected a plea deal. According to reports from the courtroom, prosecutors had offered a plea deal after consulting with Randon's family. Gully's own lawyer recommended he accept it, but Gully refused. He's choosing to go to trial. If convicted of murder, Reuben Gully faces 20 years to life in prison. This wasn't a case of strangers crossing paths by random chance. This was a business relationship, as strange as that sounds when you're talking about an 18-year-old selling marijuana to a 20-year-old. But that's what investigators believe connected Randon Lee and Reuben Gully. Transactions that had happened before, successfully, without violence. According to testimony from Randon's girlfriend during the preliminary hearing, she knew about her boyfriend's marijuana sales. She wasn't in the dark about what he was doing, and she specifically told investigators that Gully had been one of his customers in the past. They had done business before. Money had been exchanged for product. Both parties had walked away satisfied. That history is important. It meant Randon had no reason to fear Gully. This wasn't meeting a stranger from the internet. This wasn't a first-time deal with an unknown quantity. This was someone who had bought from him before. Someone who had his phone number. Someone who could call him up and arrange another transaction. And that's exactly what happened on June 24th, 2022. It was a Friday. Summer in Alabama. Hot. Humid. The kind of evening where people are out, gas stations are busy, life is happening all around. Randon was one day away from his 19th birthday. One day away from whatever celebration his family had planned. One day away from being able to say he'd made it to 19, according to Detective Hadaway's testimony. Gully called Randon at some point that evening. The call came at approximately 10:39 p.m. 2 minutes later, at 10:41 p.m., Randon Lee was shot. 2 minutes. Think about what you can do in 2 minutes. You can't even finish a song. You can't watch a full TikTok video. You barely have time to order food at a drive-thru. But in 2 minutes, Randon Lee went from answering a phone call to dying in his car. Here's what investigators believe happened based on surveillance footage and witness testimony. Randon arrived at the Exxon gas station on St. Stephen's Road in Prichard. It's the kind of gas station you'd find in any small city. Pumps out front, convenience store inside, people coming and going constantly. Normal. Public. The kind of place where you wouldn't expect violence because there are too many witnesses, too many cameras, too many people around. Maybe that's why Randon felt safe there. According to the investigation, Gully and at least one other person arrived in a separate vehicle. Surveillance cameras captured the vehicles pulling up to the gas pumps. The footage shows the suspects getting out of their vehicle and entering Randon's car. This is important. Randon let them in. He wasn't forced. He wasn't surprised. He opened his door or unlocked it, and they got his car. Because as far as he knew, this was just another transaction, just another customer, just another deal that would put some money in his pocket. But something went wrong inside that car. We don't know exactly what was said. We don't know if there was an argument about price or quantity. We don't know if Gully intended to rob him from the start or if something changed in those 2 minutes between the phone call and the shooting. We don't know if Randon sensed danger and tried to back out. We don't know if he reached for the marijuana or if Gully reached for a gun first. What we do know is that shots were fired inside that vehicle at the Exxon station. Multiple shots, according to reports. And Randon Lee, 18 years old, was hit. Here's what happened next. According to police, Randon, wounded and bleeding, managed to get his car moving. He drove. He made it across St. Stephen's Road to another gas station. Not far, maybe a few hundred feet, but far enough that he wasn't at the scene of the shooting anymore. And that's where his car stopped. That's where 18-year-old Randon Lee died from his injuries. Think about what that means. He was shot, and he still tried to save himself. He still tried to get away. He still fought to survive. He drove across a street with bullets in his body because some part of him believed he could make it. He could get help. He could live. But he couldn't. The suspects, according to police, fled the scene in their vehicle. They left Randon dying across the street and drove away. This is the lure that killed Randon Lee. The belief that he knew his customer. The assumption that because they'd done business before, this transaction would be like the others. The miscalculation that a public place meant he was safe. The trust that comes from familiarity. Trust that turned out to be deadly. You have to understand something about young people in these situations. When you're 18 and you've successfully sold marijuana to someone multiple times, you start to feel like you've got it figured out. You start to think you can read people. You start to believe you know who's safe and who's dangerous. You develop a false sense of security that comes from nothing going wrong before. Randon thought he knew what he was doing. He thought he understood the risks. He thought meeting at a busy gas station with someone he'd sold to before was manageable. He thought wrong. And the question that would haunt his family and investigators for years was simple. Why? If Gully had bought from him before without incident, what changed? Was it always a plan to rob him? Was there a dispute in the car? Did something go wrong that escalated to violence? Or was Randon simply in business with someone who was capable of murder and didn't know it? The answers to those questions would have to wait for trial. The suspects fled the scene in their vehicle immediately after shooting. They left Randon dying and drove away into the night. Emergency services were called. First responders arrived to find Randon in his vehicle at the second gas station. They attempted to save him, but the injuries were too severe. Randon Lee was pronounced dead from gunshot wounds. It was June 24th, 2022, one day before his 19th birthday. When police arrived at the scene, they found Randon Lee in his vehicle at the gas station across from where the shooting occurred. Despite efforts by first responders, he was pronounced dead from gunshot wounds sustained during the attack. The investigation began immediately. Prichard Police Detective Jason Hadaway became the lead investigator on the case. His job was to piece together what had happened in those critical minutes at the Exxon station. Surveillance footage became crucial evidence. The cameras at the gas station had captured the vehicles arriving, the suspects exiting their car and entering Randon's vehicle, and the immediate aftermath of the shooting. While the footage didn't show inside the car where the shooting occurred, it established a timeline and showed who was present. Detective Hadaway interviewed witnesses and family members. Randon's girlfriend provided critical information. She told investigators that Randon had been selling marijuana and that Gully had been one of his customers. She said her boyfriend had set up a drug deal for that evening. She provided context that helped investigators understand a relationship between victim and suspect. Phone records were subpoenaed. Those records revealed the call from Gully to Randon at 10:39 p.m., just 2 minutes before the shooting. That timing was significant. It suggested coordination. It suggested planning. It suggested Gully knew exactly where Randon was and when. But there were also significant gaps in the physical evidence. No shell casings were recovered from Randon's vehicle. No murder weapon was found. No fingerprints or DNA evidence directly linking Gully to the shooting scene were collected. The prosecution's case will rely heavily on circumstantial evidence. The phone records, the witness testimony, the surveillance footage showing vehicles and people, but not the actual shooting. For 2 months, the case remained open. Ophelia Nichols, Randon's mother, used her massive TikTok platform to plead for information. Her videos reached millions of people. She offered a reward. She begged anyone who knew anything to come forward. The case gained national attention because of her platform and her pain. Then, in August 2022, Reuben Thomas Gully surrendered to authorities. He was charged with murder. At his initial court appearance, the judge ordered him held without bond. Gully pleaded not guilty to all charges. The community response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people attended a vigil for Randon at the location where he died. They brought candles that flickered in the summer night. They brought blue and white balloons, Randon's favorite colors, according to family. They brought flowers and teddy bears and photos. They stood together and mourned a young man whose life had been taken too soon. Ophelia Nichols attended the vigil, supported by her other children and community members. She thanked people for coming. She talked about who Randon was as her son, not just as a victim. She cried. She grieved publicly, with millions watching, because that's what happens when you're an internet personality. Even your deepest pain becomes public. A GoFundMe was established to help the family with funeral expenses. Thousands of people donated. The outpouring of support was genuine and massive, showing how many people felt connected to Mama Tot and wanted to help her through the worst moment of her life. The Exxon station where the shooting began remained open. Life continued there, as it does. But for those who knew what happened, driving past that gas station would never be the same. A memorial sprang up at the second station where Randon died. Flowers and candles and photos that neighbors refreshed for weeks, then months, creating a permanent reminder of the violence that occurred there. After his arrest in August 2022, Reuben Gully was arraigned on murder charges. He pleaded not guilty. He was held without bond pending trial. The case moved slowly through the court system, as murder cases often do. Pre-trial hearings were held. Evidence was presented at a preliminary hearing where Detective Jason Hadaway testified about the investigation. That hearing revealed both the prosecution's theory of the case and the significant challenges they would face at trial. During the preliminary hearing, the defense attorney questioned Detective Hadaway extensively about the evidence, or lack thereof. Hadaway had to acknowledge that police had not interviewed any witnesses who could directly identify Gully as the shooter. They had not recovered shell casings from a vehicle. They had not found a murder weapon. They had no fingerprints or DNA evidence linking Gully to the crime scene. The defense strategy became clear: attack the sufficiency of the evidence. Argue that phone calls alone shouldn't be enough to convict someone of murder. Point out every gap in the investigation. Create reasonable doubt. The prosecution strategy was equally clear. Present the totality of circumstances. Show the history of drug transactions between Gully and Lee through the girlfriend's testimony. Present the phone records showing the call 2 minutes before the shooting. Use the surveillance footage to establish presence at the scene. Argue that all these pieces together paint a picture of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But then something happened that would complicate everything. Detective Jason Hadaway, the lead investigator on the case, was convicted of perjury. The conviction stemmed from an unrelated case where Hadaway had lied under oath about questioning a murder suspect who had invoked his right to an attorney multiple times. The judge in that case, Judge Jill Phillips, found Hadaway guilty of third-degree perjury in November 2024. She sentenced him to 6 months in county jail and called his actions inexcusable, stating he was a dishonor to the entire profession. Hadaway appealed the conviction. But in October 2025, a Mobile County Circuit Court jury again found him guilty of third-degree perjury. This created a massive problem for the Randon Lee murder case. The lead investigator's credibility was now destroyed. Any defense attorney could point to his perjury conviction and argue that his testimony shouldn't be trusted. How could a jury believe a detective who had been convicted of lying under oath in another case? Despite this complication, or perhaps because of it, prosecutors offered Gully a plea deal in October 2025. They consulted with Randon's family before making the offer. The exact terms of the plea deal haven't been made public, but it would have avoided the uncertainty of trial. Gully's own attorney, Chase Dearman, recommended he accept the plea deal, but Gully refused. He rejected the offer and chose to go to trial instead. Mobile County Circuit Judge Michael Wyndham reset Gully's trial date for February 2026. Nearly 4 years after Randon Lee's death, the case will finally go before a jury. If convicted of murder, Reuben Gully faces 20 years to life in prison. But with the lead investigator's perjury conviction, the lack of physical evidence, and reliance on circumstantial proof, this case is far from a guaranteed conviction. The defense attorney acknowledged that Hadaway's testimony would be vital in the case, even as he prepared to attack the detective's credibility. The trial promises to be a battle of competing narratives. Did Gully murder Randon Lee during a drug deal, or is the evidence simply too weak to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? Randon's family will have to wait until February 2026 to find out if justice will be served. Ophelia Nichols, who used her platform to help catch her son's alleged killer, will have to sit in a courtroom and listen to every detail of how her son died. She'll have to hear the defense attorney attack the investigation and create doubt. She'll have to trust that 12 strangers will see through the complications and deliver justice for her son. The verdict, when it comes, will determine whether Gully spends decades in prison or walks free. People kept asking, how did an 18-year-old selling marijuana to someone he'd sold to before end up dead? How did a seemingly routine transaction at a busy gas station turn into murder? The case sparked conversations about the dangers of illegal drug trade, even at the lowest levels. When you're dealing in illegal markets, there are no protections, no contracts, no recourse if someone decides to rob you instead of pay you. Number 911 to call if a deal goes bad. According to experts in criminal behavior and drug-related violence, the answer is clear. This was never just about marijuana. It was never just about money. It was about the fundamental lawlessness of illegal drug transactions, where violence is always a possibility and trust can get you killed. When you sell drugs, even marijuana, even in small amounts, you're operating in an unregulated market where violence is the only enforcement mechanism. You can't go to the police if someone robs you. You can't take someone to court for not paying. You have no legal recourse. And that creates an environment where the most dangerous people can prey on the least cautious ones. Randon Lee thought he knew his customer. He thought previous successful transactions meant future safety. He thought meeting in a public place provided protection. But none of those assumptions matter when someone decides to use violence instead of payment. Some people enter drug transactions with the intention to rob from the start. They see an opportunity, someone with drugs or cash or both, and they see a victim who can't report the crime. They know the dealer won't go to the police and say, "Someone robbed me during an illegal drug sale." They exploit that vulnerability. Whether that was Gully's plan from the beginning or whether something went wrong during transaction, we may never know for certain. But the result was the same. An 18-year-old died because he was operating in a world where violence was always a possible outcome. The complications in this case, the lack of physical evidence, the lead investigator's perjury conviction, the reliance on circumstantial proof, highlight how difficult it can be to get justice when crimes occur in the shadows of illegal activity. Witnesses don't come forward. Physical evidence is scarce. The very nature of the crime makes prosecution challenging. But here's what we know for certain. Randon Lee was 18 years old. He made a choice to sell marijuana. That choice was illegal. That choice was risky. But that choice should not have been a death sentence. No matter what Randon was doing, no matter what business he was in, no matter what mistakes he made, he deserved to make it to his 19th birthday. He deserved the chance to learn from his mistakes. He deserved the opportunity to grow up, make better choices, and become whoever he was meant to be. I hope Randon's story reminds us all that young people are still developing judgment, still learning consequences, still figuring out that some decisions can't be undone. I hope it reminds us that illegal drug markets are inherently dangerous, no matter how small-scale they seem. And I hope it reminds us that mothers love their children through everything, through mistakes, through bad choices, through tragedy, and that love deserves justice. The trial is set for February 2026. Whatever the verdict, a young man is dead who should be alive. A mother lost her son one day before his birthday. And a community learned once again that violence interrupts anywhere, anytime, for reasons that never make sense. I'll see you in the next episode of Crazy Crime Lures.